A world fights back. Greetings, my armies of Armageddon! We all know about DC's dark multiverse, where in every world, a series of tragic mishaps and events lead to the fall of heroes and their morals. With no hope of absolution or deliverance, the heroes themselves drive their worlds toward complete destruction. But what if a world fights hard enough to make its way back from the brink of such hopelessness? Today in our video, we tell the story of such an Earth. So let's hop aboard our multiversal motorcycles and ride into the lore of Earth 22. Before we begin, we have a small request. If you like our content, please subscribe to our channel. It's a small click for you, but it means a lot to us. Thank you. Chapter 1. A world without heroes. Thunder and lightning cracked open the crimson-red skies. A star fell through it. An emerald fire burned while an army fought. An angel screamed out in pathos to the inhabitants of Earth. This was Wesley Dodd's vision on his deathbed. Wesley read out loud from the book of Revelation of St. John in the Bible. While reading, he started seeing flashes, as if the book had come to life. He tried to convince his longtime friend, Pastor Norman McKay, about the visions that he was having. According to him, they were divine prophecies. But Norman refused to believe it and dismissed them as Wesley's nightmares, given his age and his condition. Wesley went into a frenzy while the doctors tried to calm him down. As verse 11:3 went, he wished to empower his witnesses. He requested Norman to read the book out loud. As Norman started reading 1 Corinthians 15, Dodd slowly passed into the cold slumber of death. Attending his funeral, Norman reminisced about the days when Wesley would meet Norman and his wife and tell them stories of the glory days, when superheroes used to exist in a world of values and valor. Once upon a time, Wesley was a superhero himself. He was the Sandman. Where have the heroes gone? As Norman walked down the road, he was reminded of the tales that Wesley concocted of a time gone by. There were superheroes. They were saviors. Those were the golden days. The skies were a brighter shade of blue, and the existence of the metahumans radiated moral and hope. That time was no more. The US government had put across several metahuman laws that somehow drove those superhumans away. Wesley wanted people to know of that golden period. Wesley didn't want the people to forget. Norman walked into a superhuman-themed restaurant. Several attendants dressed up as superhumans and waited for the guests. Seeing what the superhero values were reduced to, he left the place and walked to a crossing. As per God's words, Norman recalled, the meek would one day inherit the earth. But the irony was that it was the mighty who now ruled the time. Suddenly, a fight broke out among a group of young metahumans. They wreaked havoc in the city. Watching them, Norman reflected how they were the children and grandchildren of the original line of legends, but lacked their morals heavily. Their bickers and wars endangered the innocents around them, but they hardly cared. They were the protectors, so nobody could question them. Norman saved a little girl by covering her from pieces of debris. The new metahumans were unstoppable, until a news bulletin was aired on a billboard screen. The Protector and the Protected all watched in horror, scared stiff. Kansas had been decimated. The sacred duty. The subconscious scars of horror affected Norman so much that his fear leaked into his next sermon. He cited those versions from the Bible that spoke of the horrors of kingdom come and the day of judgment. Disappointed that he failed to give hope to his congregation, Norman reflected on Wesley's prophecies. He understood that somehow Wesley knew what was coming. Everyone had deemed Wesley insane, but that insanity now ran in Norman, as Norman was also experiencing dreams and visions of a dark and uncertain future. As he pondered on that final flicker of hope, Spectre appeared in front of him. He told Norman that Armageddon was approaching fast, and the only way to evade it was Norman's dreams. The Spectre was given the solemn duty of punishing the ones responsible for the evil at hand, and he needed to tether himself with a human soul who sought justice. Stupefied, Norman said that he wasn't in search of justice, but Spectre assured him that he would need it. Spectre had arrived in search of Wesley, but he was too late, and now Norman had that boon passed on to him. So they left together to witness the events that would lead to Armageddon, or may avert it. Spectre took Norman to a place that resembled Kansas, but was actually a hologram projection of the place. They witnessed an old farmer working, imbibed with otherworldly powers and abilities. It was Superman. The Calling. Spectre and Norman watched as the events unfolded. Superman had left Metropolis and was on a self-imposed exile in his fortress of solitude, where he tended to his farm and animals in a holographic world resembling Kansas. There arrived another hero, Wonder Woman. She bore tragic news from the outside world, but Superman wasn't interested. He'd walked away from that world of hopelessness a long time ago, and he had no intention to return there. He was so mentally detached from humanity that he gave up his human name Clark and preferred to be called Cal. He thought that Earthlings died, which was completely normal. But originally he spoke out of some deep-rooted sorrow. Diana persisted, reminding Superman about the ideals that he held dear, truth, and and justice. She told him that the superhero named Magog had grown out of control and asked him to just take a look at whatever was happening in the outside world. Superman went into a room filled with projectors and looked at the news channels from all over the world. There, he learned about the ecological disaster in Kansas. Magog and his group of young metahumans, the Justice Battalion, had descended upon a weak parasite in St. Louis. The battle stretched on to the wheat fields of Kansas. Parasite had implored them to leave him alone. He even told them that he'd surrender, but Magog and his group kept unleashing their savagery on him. Finally, Parasite unleashed a focused attack on Captain Atom and tore him open. Captain Atom's energy ruptured and a nuclear wipeout happened, killing millions instantly. Not only Kansas, but parts of Nebraska, Iowa, and Missouri all became irradiated wastelands. America's farmlands were lost, and the world economy had plummeted due to the projected global famine. Magog was the only survivor, but nowhere to be found. The transmission ended. Superman turned the projectors off with a heavy heart. The rest of us. Diana asked Superman to come back and join her. He was their leader once. All the heroes took their inspiration and ideals from Superman. If he didn't come back, the rest of the superheroes would also refuse to get involved. Diana hoped that together they could save the world. However, Superman refused too. He said he couldn't do anything about what happened and asked Diana to return to her island. Without any further words, Diana left. Norman asked the Spectre about the rest. Spectre told him of the remaining superheroes from the time gone by. While some gave up hope and spirit when Superman abandoned his duties, others still helped humanity in secret. The Spectre then revealed to Norman that despite the passage of time, some of the legendary heroes were still out there, keeping watch over their realms. The Flash had dashed through the streets of Keystone City, racing alone everywhere at every instant, ensuring its safety. Hawkman soared over the forests of the Pacific Northwest, protecting the beasts and birds. High above Earth, the Green Lantern sat as the lone Sentinel Guardian in an Emerald City orbiting the planet. They'd retreated to their own realms, preferring solitude over further involvement with mankind. Content in their own ancient civilizations or distant futures, they'd left humanity to navigate its own path. When Norman had inquired about Batman, the Spectre had revealed that Gotham City had still been under the Dark Knight's watchful eye, albeit with a new approach. Batman had then employed robots to patrol the streets, ensuring the city's safety in his absence. Superman returns. Spectre brought back Norman to Metropolis, but Norman wanted to see more. He knew that the destruction of Kansas had kick-started the Armageddon, and if there was any way that could be averted, Norman wanted to know it. Spectre denied him any answers, as he didn't promise him anything. However, Norman pointed out that Spectre, a being of God, just by being there, promised a glimmer of hope that things could turn the other way. Just then, two groups of new metahumans started a fight, endangering the innocent people on a suspension bridge and a cable car. Norman pointed out that after Kansas, the heroes who followed Magog had stripped themselves of any shred of regards for human lives. The cable of the overhead car had collapsed. People inside the cable car shouted out for someone to save them. Norman shouted at Spectre that humanity needed hope more than anything. Suddenly, there was a gush of a mighty wind that created a water funnel and supported the cable car from falling. The wind subdued all the reckless metahumans and bent their weapons. Humans and metahumans alike looked up in the sky. The gush of wind was faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. The gush of wind was Superman, and he'd returned to save his world. But as everyone cheered, Norman saw a vision of Superman crying out in great pain and anguish, while the sky seared with smoking red heat around him. Norman knew at that moment that the Armageddon had just begun. Chapter 2. The Fellowship of Heroes. They came from the skies. Norman McKay found himself caught in a surreal vision, where he glimpsed what seemed like 7 angels engulfed in the red fiery glow emanating from the torch of the Statue of Liberty. The Spectre, his companion, guided him toward the epicenter of this mysterious vision. Their journey led them straight to the Statue of Liberty, where they stumbled upon a scene of chaos and conflict. Standing tall amidst the chaos was the Americommando, a figure embodying the darkest aspects of fascism, armed to the teeth and ready to fierce his twisted version of order. He aimed his guns at immigrants approaching Ellis Island, menacing them with threats of expulsion from America. However, the scene took a sudden turn when a trio of robots, dubbed Red, White, and Blue, swooped in, engaging the Americommando in a fierce battle. Their clash unfolded in the midst of innocent bystanders, whose safety seemed to matter little to the combatants. Just when it seemed like the situation might spiral out of control, a figure of hope arrived. It was Superman, the legendary hero, but he was not alone. Alongside him stood 6 other members of the former Justice League: Wonder Woman, Power Girl, the Flash, Green Lantern, the Ray, and Hawkman, united in their resolve to restore peace and justice. Superman tore off Americommando's armor and subdued him, while the other heroes focused on saving the innocents. But there was a deeper conspiracy at play. Two psionics known as the Brain Trust had been manipulating the Minutemen for their own nefarious purposes. Before they could order the Minutemen to shoot at everyone, they were swiftly incapacitated by a boomerang from Red Robin, a former ally of Batman who had now allied himself with Superman's cause. Wonder Woman and Power Girl incapacitated the rest of the Minutemen, and Superman mended the Statue of Liberty with his heat rays. The battle was over, but the war wasn't. As the crowd gathered up to thank the heroes, they flew off and headed to the UN building. The Promise. Greed gathered outside the grand halls of the United Nations. A throng of eager faces awaited the return of their heroes. Among them stood Superman, towering above the crowd, his voice carrying weight and assurance as he spoke to those gathered. He spoke of a new challenge, a rise of metahumans who lack reverence for human life. But he vowed that they, the heroes, were back for good. With a solemn promise, Superman pledged to personally guide these newcomers, instilling in them the values and morals of true heroes, truth and justice, tempered with wisdom, and employing force only as a last resort. He assured the crowd that he'd set things right once more. As questions buzzed among the press, Superman remained silent on the matter of Magog, leaving Wonder Woman to offer reassurance that they'd handle him should he reappear. And so, amidst the murmurs of the crowd and the flashing of cameras, a promise was made, echoing power and hope. As the heroes flew away, Norman and the Spectre visited the inside halls of the UN and found the leaders afraid, as they were no longer the pioneers of humanity. Norman asked Spectre about the next hero Superman was going to call. The answer was Batman. Distanced friends. Superman visited a decimated Wayne Manor, moved the grandfather clock and made his way to a flooded Batcave in search of his old friend. But all he found was spurn and taunt in the broken voice of a nearly broken vigilante. The truth was tragic. Bruce's identity as Batman was no longer a secret. Wayne Manor and the Batcave lay in ruins, courtesy of Bane and Two-Face, leaving Bruce broken both physically and emotionally. Moreover, the villain genocide blew up Arkham Asylum, Belle Reve, and Blackgate, killing everyone. Forced to rely on his exoskeleton for mobility, he'd reluctantly retired from his role as Gotham's protector, instead deploying Bat robots to maintain order in the wake of chaos. Superman extended his hand to Bruce and asked him to join the Justice League, but Bruce denied. He said that joining the League and punching metahumans into line would only make matters worse. It required precision, finesse, and time. Superman pointed out that Bruce had nearly turned Gotham into a police state. Bruce said he had human allies who helped him spread his influence from Gotham to Star City, not giving in to his idea of a totalitarian regime. As Superman left, Ted Kord, Oliver Queen, and Dinah Lance came out of the shadows and Bruce showed them the help he was getting. His personal list of superheroes spread across the world. Pawns at play. Norman found himself perplexed and unsettled after witnessing the disagreements between Superman and Batman. Sensing his distress, Spectre offered a calming perspective. He explained that the differing upbringings of the heroes, including Wonder Woman, shaped their unique ideals. The plan was put into action. Superman and the Justice League remained steadfast in their mission. They sought to recruit allies among superhumans willing to join their cause, while also confronting those who resisted with necessary force. His ranks grew heavily. Meanwhile, a new threat emerged in the form of Lex Luthor's Mankind Liberation Front. Its ranks had Cobra, Catwoman, Vandal Savage, Riddler, and Ibn al-Zufash. Lex intended to use the battle between Superman's Justice League and the rogue metahumans to make them rulers of the world. In a surprising twist observed by Norman and Spectre, an adult Billy Batson served Lex Luthor obediently, giving him a shave. Billy was Captain Marvel. In a surprising twist observed by Norman and Spectre, an adult Billy Batson, known as Captain Marvel, served Lex Luthor obediently. This unexpected sight hinted at darker machinations at play within Luthor's ranks. One brick at a time. Amidst the pulsating lights and thumping beats of a nightclub, Superman's commanding presence drew the attention of a motley crew of violent metahumans. With unwavering resolve, he delivered a clear ultimatum: join the League willingly or face consequences. As Superman exited, Nightstar and Avia pondered his offer, contemplating their next move. Unexpectedly, Oliver Queen arrived, offering an alternative path to the intrigued duo. Meanwhile, Superman struggled with a growing tide of metahumans turning against the League. From Norman's point of view, Superman was prepared, but in a way to bring forth the Armageddon. Superman and his League took their operations into a global scale, subduing the metahumans all over. But there were rebellions too, and that frustrated Superman. He wasn't born to be a world leader or a dictator. He was just a superhuman from Kansas. He stood for hope. He wanted to help, but socio-governmental scenarios were not his area of expertise. Wonder Woman suggested a refuge on Earth, where the rebels could be brought for rehabilitation. They sought help from Aquaman, the king of the seven seas, to create a penal colony under the oceans. But Aquaman refused, saying he had nothing to do with the waste humans of the world. At the Watchtower, Superman and Wonder Woman shared an intimate moment when suddenly someone came bearing news. Magog had been spotted. Magog. In the desolate remnants of the Kansas landscape, Magog stood alone in the ruins and kept his futile attempts to rebuild, failing miserably. Superman's arrival sparked a confrontation, the air thick with tension and accusations. Magog pointed a finger of blame at Superman, holding him responsible for the cataclysmic events that had unfolded. He traced the tragedy back to the day the Joker mercilessly slaughtered the staff of the Daily Planet, including Superman's beloved wife, Lois Lane. As the Joker was apprehended, Magog took matters into his own hands, delivering swift and lethal justice with his energy staff. Despite Superman's efforts to bring Magog to justice, the courts deemed Joker's killing as deserving, setting Magog free. Votes were taken, polls were done. The majority clearly supported Magog as the hero of Metropolis. Seeing what future Magog represented, Superman left with a heavy heart. Finishing his story, Magog showed the wasteland of Kansas to Superman and told him that it was the tomorrow he represented. With a bitter edge to his words, Superman mocked Magog, highlighting that he must be proud. Anguish and desperation fueled Magog's actions, his soul weighed down by the burden of countless lives lost. In a moment of vulnerability, he shot a harmless blast at Superman, then broke down in tears. He pleaded for release from the torment or any means to silence the haunting voices of the past. Recuperating from the blast, Superman realized in his heart that it was an ongoing war. The Gulag. After apprehending Magog, Superman went to Apokolips to meet Orion, who had killed and overthrown Darkseid. He asked him for his wise insight on controlling the metahumans, Orion being the ruler of an entire planet. Orion offered a different path. He told Superman to deport all the apprehended metahumans to Apokolips and he'd keep them contained. However, Superman denied. He wanted to reform the metahumans, not subject them to torture. Orion suggested Superman to go meet Mr. Miracle and Barda, who were leading a civil resistance against him. Mr. Miracle and Barda left for Earth with Superman to help him build his stronghold of justice. All the heroes gathered in the desolate lands of Kansas and helped with the construction. Meanwhile, on the other side, Bruce, Oliver, Dinah, and Ted joined Lex's Mankind Liberation Front. They didn't see Superman's action as an act of rehabilitation. To them, Superman was building a gulag, a concentration camp for metahumans. They knew there would be a war, and after that, the mankind they represented would rise to power. Chapter 3: Road to Ragnarok. The players on the other sides. In a place outside time, Norman McKay's mind drifted once again into a realm of visions. This time, he witnessed Captain Marvel engulfed in lightning. He roared, and 7 thunders answered his voice. This sight filled Norman with dread as he couldn't understand Captain Marvel's role in the upcoming catastrophe. To him, those dreams of Armageddon signified something ominous. Spectre soothed Norman by telling him that he and his dreams were what guided Spectre to the great unraveling. Guided by the enigmatic Spectre, Norman found himself standing before a foreboding structure rising from the desolate Kansas wastelands, the Gulag, Superman's ambitious reformation center for the deadliest and uncontrollable metahumans. Despite its grand scale, the facility had quickly exceeded its capacity within just 2 weeks of construction, a testament to the overwhelming numbers of its occupants getting added day by day. Yet, under the watchful eye of Kryptonian battlesuit robots and the security set up by architect and warden Scott Free, order was maintained within the Gulag's serene confines. Within those walls, dissent simmered beneath the surface, as some residents scorned the holographic teachings of Superman. The situation would have escalated if not for Captain Comet, who dealt personally with the more unruly inmates. Meanwhile, the ever-cunning Lex Luthor utilized White's eye to clandestinely observe the mounting unrest alongside Billy Batson. At the same time, they were watched upon by the Quintessence. Meanwhile, Norman and the Spectre observed the conversation of the Quintessence. With Shazam pleading for understanding, tensions rose. Highfather ended the conversation with the statement that human actions and life were just a speck in the order of greater things, and the Quintessence would not waste their time in insignificant human bicker. Amidst it all, Norman engaged in conversation with Deadman, who warned him that Spectre was an angel of death, and there's no surety whose side he was on. The Holy Trinity. Norman and Spectre travel outside Green Lantern's watchtower, where Superman and Wonder Woman sat talking about the days gone by. Wonder Woman revealed that she was banned from Paradise Island through a trial by her mother. Her mother thought that Wonder Woman had shied away from forcing peace upon man's world. She reminded Superman that being warriors, they had to wage combat. But Superman denied, he in turn reminding her that being protectors, their obligation was to maintain peace. With their perspectives divided, Superman flew away. Meanwhile, at Lex Luthor's base, the secret of Billy Batson was revealed. He'd used mind-controlling worms created by Dr. Sivana and slid them through Billy's ears. The worms helped Lex control every action of Billy. He showed Billy pictures of a world where metahumans were destroying human beings and brainwashed him to join his cause. Billy tried to resist once and utter his magical words, but Lex stopped him and told him of the special job that he had for Billy. Unbeknownst to Lex, all his actions with Billy were being watched by a mechanical bat, courtesy of Batman. The master plan. Lex met Bruce and showed him the bat robots that he was creating with Bruce's design. He was confident in crushing the League with the robots and creating a new world order. Bruce warned Lex that in no way Lex should hint on world domination. Bruce said that he was helping him only because he thought it as a necessary evil for Superman to be defeated, so that mankind could rise. Oliver Queen inquired Lex about his plans to subdue Superman, and Lex affirmed that he was working on it. Batman revealed his army of young heroes, the sons and daughters of the legendary superheroes. All of them would fight by his side against the League. Lex also confirmed that he was planning something at the Gulag to cause mass chaos. As the members of the Liberation Front mused on their plans, Bruce talked with an enigmatic man and asked his help to read the mind of Billy Batson. That man was Martian Manhunter, who had lost his abilities and grown very weak after opening his mind to the world. Seeing Martian in pain, Bruce pacified him and told him to have rest and dream. And then Billy Batson walked in, confident amongst the young heroes, as all of them looked up to him in awe. He was a god. His simple involvement in all of this could turn existence upside down, and that bothered Batman. The growing unrest. From the watchtower above, Superman used his telescopic vision to keep a watch on Earth, while some of his League members whispered about how his plans were going to fail. Just at that same instant, the Flash, a being surpassing several planes of existence at every point of time, spotted Norman. He pulled Norman out of his spectral plane and put him in front of Superman. Norman fumbled in front of the imposing Superman, but then tried to warn him about the upcoming Armageddon. Superman assured the old Norman that Armageddon was hardly going to transpire. He assured Norman that the sequence of events that were unfolding were totally controllable, when suddenly news came of a berserk riot erupting at the Gulag. As Spectre pulled Norman back to his plane, an enraged Wonder Woman shouted out orders. She was not to be trifled with. She wasn't letting anyone accuse her of not exerting necessary force ever again. She designated Flash, Green Lantern, and Power Woman to take back control of the Gulag by whatever means necessary. Superman tried to reason with her, but she refuted. After both of them gathered themselves together, they went to meet the Secretary General of the UN to plead for support in ensuring the safety of the Gulag and the delicate balance of power on Earth. At the meeting, the entire UN was already discontent, as they weren't consulted when Superman had built the Gulag in Kansas. When Superman was asked if the metahumans at the Gulag were docile and acclimatized, he could only tell the truth. Superman promised them that although the metahumans were out of control, Superman would take care of them and teach them the ways of humanity. However, the Secretary General could only see the Gulag as a ticking time bomb and planned on creating contingency measures for humanity. Failed in their appeal, Superman and Wonder Woman left with a heavy heart. The double cross. Lex barged into his base, yelling out to everyone to prepare for the final strike. He wanted to leverage the riot at the Gulag, and he ordered Billy Batson to turn into Captain Marvel and break the inmates free. Then Lex planned to deploy his Bat robot army. The chain reaction would cause an inevitable war amongst the angry metahumans and Superman's League, and only humanity would survive. Reluctantly, as Billy tried to whisper his magic word and do the bidding of Lex, someone punched him and put a leg on his throat so that he couldn't utter a word. It was old man Bruce, the Batman, and he smiled and said, "Hello, Billy." Bruce revealed to a bewildered Lex that he allied with Lex's Liberation Front, only to know about his plans with Billy Batson. Billy was a wild card in the entire fiasco, and Bruce hated wild cards. He ordered his team of superheroes to strike. They easily subdued all of Lex's group. Lex tried to run and Ted Kord went after him. In the chaos, Billy managed to escape too, scared to the core. Bruce followed with a tranquilizer gun, trying to reason with him. Ted got Lex by activating the Bat robots. However, Bruce's pleading couldn't put any dent in the mind-controlled Billy. What was tragic was that he was still a little boy inside. He was scared of everything and didn't know what he was doing. He crashed into a jar of Sivana's worms and went into a state of frenzy. Before Bruce could reach him, Billy uttered his magic word, Shazam! He turned into Captain Marvel and flew off to act on Lex's final order, while Bruce and his allies rushed toward the Batcave. The last stand. In the watchtower above, Wonder Woman clad herself in her golden eagle armor and the sword of Hephaestus that could carve electrons off an atom. She was ready for war, but Superman tried to reason with her. With the growing chaos, Superman advised her to remain calm and try to work on a peaceful approach. Their bickering escalated as Superman told Wonder Woman not to cross the line of killing, as they had responsibilities. And right then, a hologram came up. a bleeding Green Lantern screamed out for help. The unrest inside had escalated out of limit, and the inmates had killed Captain Comet. As Superman tried to recuperate from the shock of Comet's death, Wonder Woman became completely fueled with anger. She took off for Earth, saying that she'd give one last warning. If the inmates didn't heed her call, then it was war. Superman gained a few seconds head start and flew at supersonic speed and tore into the Batcave. He pleaded with Bruce to help him stop the war that was at hand. Superman appealed to him to safeguard innocent lives, for they were saviors. Bruce indifferently told him about Captain Marvel and the threat that he posed for mankind. Superman, shocked and alarmed, flew off toward the Gulag. Meanwhile, at the Gulag, Wonder Woman gathered her forces outside and warned the inmates one last time. Right then, the sky broke open. A lightning was called forth by Captain Marvel, which decimated the walls of the Gulag into pieces, and the inmates poured out. Meanwhile, Superman tore through the winds and skies to get to the Gulag as Norman and the Spectre watched. He was the only hope in stopping the war, but instead, he was stopped dead in his tracks. In front of him stood the mighty mortal with the power of 7 gods, Captain Marvel, and he brought the Armageddon with him. Chapter 4, Judgment Day, the war at the end of time. As Norman McKay and the Spectre bore witness, a long-feared Armageddon unfolded before their eyes. The Justice League found itself embroiled in a fierce clash with rogue superhumans who had broken free from the confines of the Gulag, poised to unleash chaos upon the world. Among them, Superman faced an uphill battle against his equal Captain Marvel, now under the sway of Lex Luthor's manipulation. Desperate to halt the carnage, McKay implored the Spectre to intervene to put an end to the senseless violence. Yet, the Spectre, bound by a higher purpose, remained steadfast in his resolve. He explained to McKay that this moment was part of a larger plan, a reckoning that must unfold according to divine will. All he could offer McKay was a solemn reminder: fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come. Whose will be done? Brainwashed to the core of his very being, sported a senseless grin on his face, as if in denial of all that was transpiring. He was Lex's greatest move against Superman. Ever hopeful, Superman tried to reason with Captain Marvel. He tried to tell him to beat the brainwashing and help him stop the war. But Marvel just punched him out of the way. As Norman watched, he knew in his heart that Superman believed himself to be the only one who could stop the war, but he was wrong. Meanwhile, at the United Nations, the Secretary General convened a meeting of world leaders and addressed them. Recognizing that humanity's existence had reached a flashpoint, he made the harrowing decision to authorize the Black Hawks to deploy 3 multi-megaton nuclear explosives. These devastating weapons, engineered to evade detection by any metahuman power radar, were to be dropped directly onto the epicenter of the ongoing conflict, in a desperate bid to bring an end to the war. For them, this drastic measure represented humanity's last resort. With the weight of his decision heavy upon him, the Secretary General retreated to his chambers, where the burden of responsibility overwhelmed him, and he succumbed to the depths of despair. The Deliverance. As Norman witnessed the war that could eclipse all light in the world, he saw Wonder Woman and her forces returning the violence that the berserk metahumans wrought on them. In his heart, he knew that the war may never come to an end. With Superman, the only voice of sanity, completely taken over by Captain Marvel, their only hope rested on a force from on high, and the clouds parted, and Norman looked up at the light, and from the skies descended the Dark Knight Batman, clad in his omnipotent steel armor. And he didn't come alone. He'd brought his own legion of superheroes with him, the old and young, the brave and the bold, and Norman's prayers were answered. The thin red line. Batman and his army acted fast, trying to stop the chaos at hand and stop the loss of life on both sides. But the inevitable happened. As the metahuman Von Bark was about to crush Zatara, Wonder Woman drove a sword through his chest, killing him instantly. While the enraged metahumans gathered on her, Batman screamed Diana's name and confronted her while fighting the others off. He told Diana about the intrinsic flaw that lay within the Amazonian principle of forcing peace upon humanity. It was a paradox that played on both sides of the thin line of good and evil. He shouted at her to stop overcompensating, but Wonder Woman wasn't to be condemned by Batman. She cut off one of Batman's laser cannons and drove him to the skies above the clouds. Suddenly, their attention was seized by the arrival of Black Hawk planes carrying the lethal payload to end it all. Meanwhile, Superman tried to help Captain Marvel fight the brainwash and stop him from creating any other havoc. Captain Marvel brought down his thunder thrice on Superman, incapacitating him. The heroes, old and new, faced severe loss on both their sides. Up in the sky, Batman implored Wonder Woman to consider the consequences of reclaiming her Amazon honor. If she allowed the bombs to fall, it would be complete devastation for herself and others. Moved by his words, Wonder Woman joined forces with Batman to intercept the planes, thwarting their destructive mission. Despite their efforts, one plane managed to release its payload, hurtling toward the warring crowd below, and Norman whispered, "No." Man versus God. The nuclear bomb fell through the dark clouds. And below, the never-ending war continued. Captain Marvel was about to call forth another bolt of lightning on a beaten, battered and bloodied Superman when Superman said, "Enough! Faster than speeding lightning!" Superman pulled Marvel in the way of the lightning. There was smoke and fire, and when it cleared, Marvel had transformed back to Billy Batson from the lightning strike. Superman stood with his steel grip fixed on Billy's mouth so that he couldn't utter one more word. He looked up at the nuclear bomb falling and tried to detonate it with his heat vision, but it reflected off. And in the spectral plane, the Spectre told Norman that the time for judgment had arrived. That instant was about to decide humanity's existence. The frustrated Norman told the Spectre to stop the bomb, but the Spectre in turn asked Norman to judge who the sinner was, man or the superhumans. Based on Norman's judgment, the sinner would be punished. And then it happened. Man and Superman became one. Norman's thoughts were somehow reflected in Superman's heart and drove his further actions. With his grip tight on Billy's mouth, Superman showed him the war and then the nuclear device. He said he could stop the bomb, but was unsure if he was allowed to do it. Either the superhumans or mankind would have to pay the ultimate price, but it wasn't for him to decide. Superman was not a god, he was not a man, but Billy was both. So Superman pleaded to Billy to fight the brainwashing and not to stop him from disarming the warhead. He asked Billy to decide for the whole world. A tear fell from Billy's eyes. He was calm. Superman removed his grip and flew toward the warhead, and Billy whispered once more, "Shazam!" The sacrifice. Seven Thunders screamed their voices as Billy whispered Shazam. He turned into Captain Marvel and flew toward Superman. He got hold of his leg and threw Superman below to the ground. But he didn't do this to stop Superman. He did this so that Superman wouldn't sacrifice himself for the world. Marvel flew off to the killer warhead and created a force field around it as everyone below watched in horror. He kept screaming, "Shazam! Shazam! Shazam!" and brought down the lightning on the warhead, and it detonated midair, taking him with it. But even after detonating, the impact was massive, and the nuclear wave rocketed to the ground, decimating everything there too. As the smoke cleared, the Spectre pointed at Superman and said, "Judgment." And there was Superman, within the smoke, screaming his lungs out in pain and anguish as he sat within the graveyard of the skeletons of the fallen heroes. Chapter 5. Man and Superman. The Judgment. With burning red eyes, Superman flew toward the UN building to confront the human attackers. The loss of life was too much, even for Superman to take. Spectre bid farewell to Norman, for the time of judgment had passed. Superman had chosen the path of destruction. But Norman shouted back at the Spectre, saying that he had no right to abandon humanity now. If Superman had decided to unleash his rage upon humanity, then Norman needed just one last chance to appeal to his human side. He demanded the Spectre to take him to the UN building. Upon reaching there, they found Superman. He'd welded the doors with his heat vision so that security couldn't get in. He was holding and shaking the very structure of the building, aiming to drop it on the gathered world leaders inside. He didn't speak, just his eyes glowed red with rage. Norman tried to appeal to Superman's senses by calling him Clark. He said that Superman wasn't angry at humanity, but at himself, as he couldn't stop the death and destruction. Superman blamed himself for Captain Marvel, Metropolis, and Kansas, while humanity cowered in fear. Norman said if Superman caused destruction at the UN, humanity would never forgive him. Superman always knew what choices to make, but he lost that judgmental instinct and edge when he chose to become more super than man. He had to look into his human self again and take control over his decisive power. The rules of coexistence. Superman was shaken back to his senses with Norman's words. He looked around and realized what wrath he was about to unleash. He found out from Batman and Wonder Woman that there were survivors, which soothed his racing heart a bit. But Batman pointed out that the metahuman population left alive was still enough to bring forth the same discord and chaos again in the future. Wonder Woman looked up to Superman and asked for the path forward. Superman calmly walked into the center and said that they'll take it one step at a time by rebuilding what was destroyed. As per Superman, the inherent flaw in the concept of superheroes was that they would be held as a godly power ruling above mankind. But that was yesterday's mistake. Superman wanted to face the problems of tomorrow by living amongst mankind. His motif was driven by the wisdom of Captain Marvel, who had to choose between humans and superhumans, but instead he chose life. As all the brave heroes gathered together, they took off their masks and helmets, a gesture of trust and unity. Superman solemnly hung Captain Marvel's cape on a flagpole, honoring the fallen hero as a lasting tribute, while Norman and the Spectre walked silently toward their light. The healing. In the aftermath, Bruce transformed his devastated Wayne Manor into a hospital, employing Lex Luthor and many members of his Mankind Liberation Front as helpers. His guilty pleasure was to taunt Lex with the word Shazam. Wonder Woman resumed her position as the Princess of Paradise Island and embarked on a new journey as a mentor to superhumans. Green Lantern assumed a role at the UN amongst the human world leaders. Superman dedicated himself to revitalizing the barren Kansas wasteland, turning it into fertile farmland. During his solemn duty, Wonder Woman visited him and gifted him him his spectacles, the ones he used to wear as a part of his secret identity once. He wore them with pride and looked up to the sun, not as Superman, but as Clark Kent. The Spectre revealed his human side of Jim Corrigan to Norman McKay and guided the pastor back to his church. There, Norman now shared a message of hope with his congregation, of which Jim Corrigan is also a part. A year later, Superman and Wonder Woman arranged to meet Batman at the cozy Planet Krypton restaurant, slipping into the civilian identities for a catch-up session. They exchanged tales of the past year, but there was a deeper purpose behind their meeting. Diana and Clark had some significant news to share with Bruce, and he quickly pieced it together. Diana was expecting Clark's child, leaving both of them surprised. But Bruce was taken aback by the request that followed. Despite his rocky history as a parent figure to his former wards, Diana wanted him to be the godparent. Both Clark and Diana believed Bruce could impart wisdom to their child that they couldn't. Lessons about mortality and morality, grounded in the trust they had for him. After some initial tension, Clark and Bruce reconciled with a hug. They departed with Diana to ponder their shared future with the child. A better tomorrow. 10 years later, Bruce became a part of the Super family, mentoring their kids as they played along. 20 years later, Bruce passed away. All the superheroes attended his funeral. 100 years later, Clark and Diana's son went beyond on outer planetary missions in search of new worlds. 200 years later, the Earth was submerged in the Great Flood. The world was rebuilt again, and 500 years later, Superman still tended to its gardens. 1,000 years later, the new legion of superheroes was formed by Superman's bloodline, and an old Superman looked up in the sky, smiling. Marvelous verdict. That's it, my riders of the Ragnarok. That ends our tale for today. As we witnessed and learned in today's video, not only the superhumans, but also us human beings should never let go of our morals, even in the darkest of times. Hope will shine bright one day, if we persevere toward it. We'll come back with more stories from Earth 22, so stay tuned to Long Reads. Please let us know your thoughts in the comment section. Oh, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. For strength lies in coexistence, and hope is the North Star of the universe.